dear friend Saunders. My respect for you continues even in you hereby certify that I did not actually die at that time, precisely at the hour you mentioned, with a variation of 5 minutes 53 seconds, which must be allowed to be no great matter in such cases. Oh, hi everyone. I was just catching up on our little reading. This is Poor Richard's Almanac. It's a reprinting. Really something special. Poor Richard's Almanac was written by Ben Franklin, who's right here in our convention photo. He started his life apprenticing with his dad as a candle maker, but he couldn't smell the stench of animal fats and was then apprenticed to his brother, who ran the New England Courier, or excuse me, the New England Courant. He apprenticed there for a while. His brother, who ran the paper, wouldn't print anything that he wrote because he just didn't have any respect for a junior's writing. So he snuck it in under the door, the letters of Silence Dogood, who was a fictitious woman. In fact, just about everything there and in Poor Richard's Almanac is a work of fiction. It's very good writing, and it's entertainment. And the thing about Poor Richard's Almanac is it was all over the colonies. People had the Bible, and they generally had that because you could pick it up for near to nothing. He had established a whole string of printing offices throughout the colonies, and they had to purchase paper and ink through him, which is why he was so opposed, or one of the reasons anyway. It affected him. The Stamp Act, it really affected him. After he did some apprentice with his brother was arrested because they didn't like some of the things he was writing, but he didn't know what the source was. He didn't know it was his brother. And his brother took over the paper for a time while he was there. The thing about Ben Franklin is he didn't have any real formal training, not in the classical sense of our other founders. When he went to work for the New England Courant, there were lots of publishing books and things because it was a printing house. So he was able to study all the latest printings and pressings and things like of that nature. So he really got a pretty good education as a self-educated man. Ben Franklin would like to be remembered as a printer, and only a printer. But he was so much more. He was our first postmaster general. He helped set up the first fire department, the first police department. He got lights on in Philadelphia. He was an inventor. And a scientist. He found a problem with lead-based paint because it had seeped into his water through the gutter system. It was in his water barrels at his home. He invented the Franklin stove, bifocals. He invented lightning rods. He did a key-to-kite experiment to show that the lightning bolt was the same as static electricity. This experiment was tried again in Europe to success. You see, he wasn't just an inventor and a scientist. Printing made him wealthy. The printing press made him wealthy. But his experiments made him world-renowned and famous. He came of age during the age of enlightenment, they called it. There had been a big religious revival in the early 1700s, and those two kind of competed with each other. But through his inventions, he became world famous. Benjamin Franklin was there for the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He was an elected member of the Continental Congress. And so when the Declaration of Independence came up and they went up to sign it, one of the other delegates said that we needed to hang together. And Ben Franklin finished it by saying, or we will surely hang separately. That's a real statement. Think about that one for a moment. But after the Declaration of Independence, that fall, he was sent to Europe. He was sent to France to try to work out a treaty with France because we were trying to get France to help and aid us in the war against England. And until we had some victories, it was a hard thing to do. They were giving us ammunition and arms, but that was quite different from trying to get them to actually help us fight. And when they did finally help us fight, it wasn't in America. They were fighting in other areas against England because they had their own agenda on what they were trying to do. But eventually we got the treaty. He also worked on treaty with ending the war with England. I mean, he was a great diplomat. He was able to get the ladies of the court whom he would pay attention to. He was able to get them to talk to their husbands and get things done. It was really a brilliant strategy he had, and he was probably our best diplomat. In the convention hall, he was there most every day. He had to be carried in because he had gout so bad that he had built this chair with long rods on it so that he could be lifted up and carried in. And that's how he was brought into the convention hall on more than one occasion. Also, as you look at the picture here, he doesn't have anything, or you've seen some pictures where he has a funnel around the one ear. That's because he's darn near deaf. He can't hear very well. And yet, you got halfway through the convention where they're arguing over Article 1 and how the representation would be in Congress, either by state or by population. And eventually we came to agreement so that one branch of our legislature would be by state and one branch would be by population. But he reminded the delegates of the need for prayer like we had during the arguments over the Declaration of Independence. And he asked the clergy, ministers, and the heads of church would come in each morning and pray for the country, pray that we could get through this great bypass. At the end of the convention, he talked about, before he left the convention, he talked about how he may have not got everything he wanted, but it was the best they could do considering the diverse group of people they had from around the country. And he said he wasn't convinced that he wouldn't think it was a great document later, that he had this ability to look over things and later decide that it was the best they could have done. Benjamin Franklin is responsible for daylight savings time. He's responsible for getting our money on on the metric system. And he's one of the few people on our dollar bills that's not a president, which really is quite an accomplishment in and of itself. He formed, when he retired from printing, he formed a group called the Junta. And they're the ones that worked on all kinds of ideas to improve the condition of man, like your police and fire, and the first library, and all these things that were being done for the betterment of the community. Benjamin Franklin's inventions, like the Franklin stove, the lightning rod, the bifocals, they weren't patented. They were just given. Some of his inventions were patented and some weren't. One of the things about the parties during the Age of Enlightenment, one of the big tricks was to have everybody gather around, hold hands, and they give you a little electric shock. It was kind of like your static electricity. And he would get people's hair to stand head on end, and they'd all laugh, and they thought that was really funny. And that's why he was trying to prove, thinking he could use electricity for other uses, and that's why he had the key and kite experiment. And he was trying to prove that it was the same thing. So really, when you look at Ben Franklin, you're looking at all that he gave to us. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution itself. He worked on both. And in the meantime, he was overseas as a delegate. He worked on the problem of William Penn's estates. See, William Penn had been given a great land grant towards the end of the previous century, and he owned 3/4 of Pennsylvania. And so they had to decide what to do with these land grants. And people were now moving in, they were settling there. And William Penn still had the deed to all this property. So it was a little bit of a problem. He managed to accomplish an awful lot. And he loved it overseas. But as he got older, towards the end of his life, he wanted to come home. He wanted to come home because he wanted to die here. He wanted to be buried in his America. When he was a diplomat over there, he would wear a fur hat, a raccoon skin hat, and a fur coat, because he felt that's what people wanted to see. See, in Europe, they considered him a colonist, and he had been so long in Europe, we had begun to consider him a European. So he didn't have the real respect at the time. But when he came home, he was elected to the Constitutional Convention. So it really does matter how things occurred. When he finally died, he was buried at Christ Church in Philadelphia. Huge crowds, apprentice printers followed his casket there. Thousands of people lined the streets. In Europe, they were in mourning. He was considered to be the first American. When we look at our founders and the many things they gave us and the things they did for us, the sacrifices they made, some more than others, they worked to get a document where we could all live as free people, where we could all live together in harmony. They didn't trust the flaw of man, of of wanting more and more power. So they divided up power. They did all they could to achieve their goals. Ben Franklin didn't just sit in. He spoke, he discussed, and he even welcomed people over for dinner parties. At one point, opening up a keg of fine alcohol to be served. He stated how he'd never been in a group of men so great as the ones that were assembled for the Constitutional Convention. He had this deep respect for everyone, and yet he only wanted to be considered a common man, a common printer. I hope you think I hope you think about that for a few minutes, and how many of these men were just simple men trying to do what was best for the good of the Republic, which is what he had given us. And when they came out of the convention hall at the end, a woman stopped and asked him, "What do we have?" He said, "A republic, if you can keep it." With that, I'd like to say goodbye for today, and I hope you join us again for the next Constitution talk, and learn about our founders and some of the other discussions we're going to have here.